Fae are an advanced, civilized race that is split into two different forms, two different cultures. The divergence of these cultures is both a point of visual interest, as they physically, whilst have resemblances, such as being tall in stature, long in hair, long within hair, a culture similar to those perhaps in other fantasy genres, associated perhaps with the elven race, as established in Tolkien's lore, for example, or similarly Games Workshop's intellectual property, though they differ from these ventures in that they are immortal. Similarly, so Tolkien's are immortal, though these creatures are immortal also, though differ in that they are not elves. The elves do exist within this world, this universe, though they are different in many ways, though likely descend from the Fae. There seems to be a sort of tier system in the way that I'm developing it currently, in that the top tier of these terrestrial creatures are the Fae, a fewer number with an advanced civilization. They breed differently from a million races and species, in that their intercourse is not direct contact, though it is derived primarily from a system based perhaps more so on insects, the insecta genus, particularly eusocial or eusociality species, or communities, as is the case with wasps, ants, bees, these sorts of creatures. The Fae are primarily matriarchal, or there's a system whereby the females are within superior positions in terms of society. There's also matrilineal, or experiences a degree of matrilineality, in that the heritability of the various social stratas or social mobility is directed primarily due to the female line as well. It's not perhaps not social mobility in the sense of an socioeconomic position within their society, though power is derived and inherited primarily through the female line, and this again restructures society. In comparison to the tier 2 race, presumably, the next in their descendancy, perhaps, maybe not direct, but perhaps direct. The elves are somewhat in between the human races, which is presumably a tier 3 type of civilization species, and that the elves do hold higher values and whilst not immortal as the Fae are, the elves do hold immortality, as do the Fae, though unlike the Fae, the elves do reproduce and procreate by means of sexual intercourse, as is the case with human beings, and to this end that means the elves and the humans are able to interbreed. The elves could be seen as a culture somewhat in between the Fae, which are almost ethereal in their practices. They are highly magical beings, the Fae, and are mysterious and little understood by the other races, except perhaps the elves, who have more of an understanding of them. The Fae are highly intellectual and value the mind and spirituality above any other physical, as opposed to physical pursuits. They preserve a culture and fundamentally driven by magic and intellectual pursuits. They are academic and educational, and they have a low opinion of other races, as it were, a higher opinion of themselves. They do have a war sect within their society, though, as mentioned prior, they do differ into fundamental aspects. Two different cultures have stemmed from the Fae, the origins of the Fae. One that lives in sort of a lighter, one which is light and fair of skin, light in eyes as well, long hair, and they tend to have lighter shades of hair within their hair, the hues of their hair. The divergent race is dark of skin, not as slender, they are more robust in their build. They have typically dark hair, though it changes to a silver or white hue, with regards as a result of certain stimuli to affect it as well, to affect the hue of the hair. Both factions do have a warrior sect as well, as they do recognise to protect their own. They aren't deities, so they do exist on the mortal plane, as it were. They are a terrestrial race of creatures, and so they do protect themselves. Though interestingly, more so from each other than other races. They view each other as a threat, and also explained earlier that the Fae are primarily a matriarchal society, sort of akin to a eusociality, in that there's an empress or a queen who's attended to by an immediate female lineage, and the warrior class and the Fae tend to be females also, interestingly, with the males tending to be the more academic of them. Whilst the Fae do value academia above all, the females are actually physically larger than the males. They tend to be not too much taller, but they tend to be not so much larger in height, but they're more physically capable, as it were. And now again, the warrior class is reserved to females. Whilst the males tend to pursue magic and the arts and the cultures in order to establish themselves within the society. Contrary to this, the other sect, the splinter sect that diverged from the Fae centuries prior to the two cultures being distinctly different. The other sect, the darker of the two, evolved differently based on the environment in which they established themselves. There was a significant moment that splintered these two factions, and which would lead to war, a civil war, as it were. And the latter of the two factions are patriarchal in their society. They are ruled by a male dynasty. The warrior classes men are male, and the females tend to pursue the arts of magic and culturally establish themselves in these pursuits, within these pursuits, as it were. They are more of a warmongering society, and their delineation or divergence has led to a differing in attitudes as well as cultural aspects in terms of the aesthetics of them, and their even the deities that they worship are different. Their attitudes are, whilst again quite in contrast to the other. This is sort of somewhat based on the Yin-Yang philosophy, though, where the two do not balance each other in the sense that they are opposites and contrast each other, as night to day or dark to light, as it were. So the significant moment within the history of the Fae is known as the bloodletting, which is a unique moment within their history, where vast quantities of them were stained within the blood of their own kindred, and this did not go unnoticed by the pantheon of their pantheon, the gods of their time, and this is why they are the way that they are in many ways. How this relates to the other two tiers in terms of it's a secondary tier race, which would be the elves, and third tier race would be the humans. Though I may change this to the elves also being a third tier race. Depends. Perhaps a first tier race also. Yes, perhaps the Fae are a first tier race. The elves being the elves were second tier race in that they, whilst they are immortal, their lives are more adaptable in terms of they're not so extreme in their beliefs as the Fae, though they are extreme by a human comparison. Of the three tiers, a third tier race is arguably the dominant of them are the human beings, which are far more diverse, widespread, conflicting, and uniting also as well. Their numbers are vast by comparison to the Fae and the Elves, though they perhaps they lack or do not possess the sophistication of the other two races, and the tier races above them. Their pantheons are vast also. They worship many more gods, and these deities, the deities in question, are actually different machinations of similar entities, meaning that the Fae worship gods that also exist in the cultures of the other two tiers of races, though quite often by a different name and even by a different aesthetic and design. They appear differently. The deities themselves, whilst mysterious to the mortal and immortal races of the terrestrial world, they manifest themselves differently and are created based on the worship that they receive, and thus they envision themselves or appear differently in the guise of different creatures based on the audience that they are exposed to. The gods themselves are the immediate gods worshipped by the terrestrial races are flawed as well. They are not perfect in the sense that whilst they are extremely powerful beings, they are also experience personality traits not too dissimilar and not unknown to or known amongst the other races. So perhaps this is what endears them to those that worship them, in that their flaws are sort of contrasted with their great power also.